Hello. So today we are in Parsha Toldot. And we notice the importance of the women, the wives and mothers of the patriarchs, in shaping the generations of the Jewish people. So Sarah influenced Abraham, and she wanted that their son, Isaac, Yitzchak, who she saw was the right person to be the continuation of the Jewish family. And that meant that it would not be through Yishmael, the daughter of Hagar, the son of Hagar, but it would be through her own son. And Sarah was a prophetess, and she knew that Yitzchak was the right one. Remember, she gave birth to him over 90, and there were a lot of miracles involved in this, and she was very clear. And Abraham says, yeah, but I love both of them. I don't want to do that. And God specifically tells Abraham, Shema b'kolah, listen to her voice. Her voice, it's interesting, it's not just her words, it's her voice that comes from within, that this is her prophetic voice, and that God was saying, this is the correct decision to be made. And then Abraham just listened to her clear guidance and did as she said. Then Yitzchak married Rebecca. And in this parsha, we see Rivka's direct influence on the continuation of the Jewish family. So what we see is that the wives and mothers have a lot to do with how the family continues. And that is, of course, always true. So Parsha Toldot, which means generations, speaks of the continuation of the generations of the Jewish people, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Yitzchak continued Avram's path of developing the family who would teach the world to become aware of the one God. That is the main job of the Jewish people, to teach the world that there is one God. And both Avraham and Yitzchak served God with all their hearts and souls. And that is the point of what we're meant to do, serve God with all our hearts and soul, to make people aware that there is one God in the world. And even though both Avraham and Yitzchak were completely dedicated to this, along with their wives, they were different types of people, which is always interesting because each one of us has our purpose in the world, but we're each unique. And we're supposed to do what we're here to do, both in the way that God tells us all to do it, and also with the uniqueness that God gives us so that we can use our own talents and qualities to be creative. So Avram's way of influence was through loving kindness, called chesed. He was always giving out. And Yitzchak's way of influence was through awe and restraint, gevura. He had self-discipline. He was more inner, different kind of person. So I want to mention that, of course, Avram taught his son Yitzchak how to live in a way that would be good for a godly world. And Yitzchak did as Avram taught him. But we have to realize that when we take our own unique qualities, we have to take what we learn and bring them into us in ways that we could use, so that we are also using our talents. In other words, when there are people who have great hospitality, they could invite many people. There are other people who say, I can't invite many people, but I would love to invite some people. Other people can cook from today till tomorrow, give them the most amazing food. And other people, they just would like to create a relaxing, beautiful atmosphere. And the atmosphere is there where they focus and less on the food. So it's both. It's doing the mitzvah of hospitality, but how you do it depends on who you are. Mm-hmm. And this is also very important. So we saw that during Lech Lecha, there was a famine, and Avram left Israel to go to Egypt to escape the famine. Then there was also a famine in the time of Yitzchak, and he also considered that option. But God appeared to Isaac and said, do not descend to Egypt, dwell in this land, for you are a blemish-free offering, and territory outside of the Holy Land is not worthy of you. Yitzchak was the only one of the forefathers never to leave the Holy Land. That was because he had been offered by Abraham, and he was going to be sacrificed, which God said, don't do that. In other words, God said, bring him, but then God said, don't do it. But because he had been offered and he was willing, whatever God wants, that gave him a certain kind of holiness. And his nature did not do well with unholiness. This is one of the key points here that we're going to go into. See, Abraham was immune to impurity. Egypt didn't bother him. He had been raised with idol worshippers, so he was able to differentiate without too much discomfort. The slang for this is street smarts. He had been among idolaters, and he knew who was who and what was what. He wasn't afraid. He just knew, all right, this one I don't want to deal with at all. This one, these I can talk to. And remember, because of his chesed, so he was comfortable with all kinds of people. So they had different methods. Abraham did outreach, and he understood the mindset out there and understood how to relate to idol worshippers and transform them to monotheism. But Yitzchak was too spiritual to go out. He didn't understand a culture that could value anything else than God. Who are these people? What are they doing? And we see this sometimes, that some people can talk to everybody and some people can say, this is not for me. I don't even get where he's coming from. I don't know how to talk to him. So Abraham was able to dialogue and debate. He was always teaching. Yitzchak was a walking example of a servant of God, an example of truth. And people who saw him were moved and impressed. Their lives changed. He didn't have to go out. He didn't have to reach out. He just was who he was, and people could see his specialness. And because the people around, the Philistines, recognized the greatness of Isaac and his path, they came to him, asking Isaac to teach them. So Avram went out and just opened his tents and said, come on in, guys, whoever wants, I'll teach you. And Yitzchak was a different person. He didn't go out, but people saw him and came to him. So both Avram and Yitzchak's purpose was to influence. They had the same objective, to bring people closer to God. So Avram related to his students and went down to them, and Yitzchak brought his students up to his level. Now, interestingly, and we'll see how this connects the rest of the Parsha, that Abraham's effect extended further. He touched a lot of people. Some of them were able to keep that influence, and others not. And Yitzchak's influence penetrated deeper. So that when people were touched, they were touched in a deeper way. So even though there were fewer people, but they took it into themselves deeply, and that remained with them more. So interesting. So the Parsha tells that Avram dug wells in order to bring out the waters of consciousness into the world. But we saw later the Philistines stuffed them up. And then Yitzchak, the next generation, redug his father's wells. And his message was that the second step in personal development was to look for your inner water, your true depth. When a person takes away the dirt, we find the divine awareness inside ourselves. And that's the work of becoming who we are meant to be. So the first thing is, we learn. There's so many books available, thank God, in English and French and all languages. So we learn. But at a certain point, we start to take it in. How can I use this? How does this affect me? And different people do it in different ways. Some people take notes, some people underline in the book, but some people, and I've said this many times, I think it's a good thing in a class to write something, at least something that you feel touches you that you want to work on. I think that's very meaningful so that we could take it in and that it goes to a deeper place. So we have both responsibilities to shine out our inner godliness into the world, and then to look deeper into ourselves to come into more connection with our essence. So we're shining out and we're coming in and looking deeper into our essence so that we can connect to God deeply and then be able to live with this and bring it out. So now the Parsha brings us to the next generation. So Rivka, had trouble conceiving. And Yitzhak and Rivka prayed for children. And after 20 years of marriage, Rivka became pregnant. Now she's very concerned about her difficult pregnancy. And she went to the yeshiva of Shem to ask God. Shem was a descendant of Noah. He was the one who really kept the path going of connecting to God. And he had prophecy. He was a person he wasn't a person who was meant to spread out the godliness to the whole world. That came to Abraham. But he was a person who learned and found the way to bring out truth. So what was she going to do? Rivka had this pregnancy that was bothering her. Seemed like it was when, it seemed like when she passed a place of learning and goodness, she had like a rocking in that direction. And then when she passed by a place of idol worship, she had a rocking in the other direction. And she was worried, she hoped she wasn't schizophrenic or her child wasn't schizophrenic. She was worried about that. But she didn't know what to do. So she went to the yeshiva of Shem to ask God, what is going on? So we see that Rivka's desire was to connect to God and to live according to what God wants. But what's interesting is that she didn't ask her husband. Most people would say, honey, this is bothering me. I don't know what's going on with this. What do you think? She didn't do that. She went straight to God because remember, Yitzhak is not a person who's knowledgeable so much out there in the ways of the world. And he would likely have told her, well, that's normal. You're pregnant. What do you expect? A little rocking here and there. I guess that's normal.
Well, thank you.
Her intuition was she needed to know because she wanted truth.
Looking at the flowers.
What is going on? And so she looked higher to God for answers. And she just want to go ahead. And she was told that this was due to two children, two nations struggling in her womb.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to.
Now, Rivka knew that her two sons had different inclinations, one pulling to holiness and the other pulling toward the pleasures of idolatrous living. Once she knew that, she had a lot more peace.
Leaving today.
There wasn't one schizophrenic child. There were two people, and each one was different. Okay. So she gave birth to twin boys, a hairy, ruddy boy named Esav, and a second son, born clutching his brother's heel, named Yaakov.
Welcome.
Two people.
Chana Rachel.
Now, Esav became a hunter, and Yaakov was an honest man who learned in the schools of Torah.
Okay.
Interestingly, Yitzhak loved Esav, and we need to understand why. And Rivka preferred Jacob. Now, some say that Esav deceived his father. He wanted to impress his father by acting as if he was genuinely connecting to God. And the famous question that the Medrash brings is that he would ask, you have to maser salt. In other words, like you would have to bring from the first fruits or vegetables, you have to bring the first animals to God. What about salt? And that was a not a real question. That was a question that, just didn't make any sense. But it made him sound like, I really don't know. So, I would like your help with this. And there are those that say Yitzhak thought, oh, that's so nice. He asks questions of a rabbi. He's asking me. Now, as a digger of wells, Yitzhak worked to penetrate through the surface to come to deeper inner potentials. So, because Yitzhak's method of living was to go inside, he would look deep into a person and see them. We have to have both qualities, where we see people on the outside, we can work with them, and we also need to see people on the inside. Who are they? Who is this person? To look for their potentials and bring them out. And that was Yitzhak's character, to bring those potentials to the surface and use them for good. But because of Yitzhak's character, he looked deeply into his son Esav, digging past the surface to find the essential core of godliness in each person or situation. We need to know that Esav also has great godliness in him. The question is, what's he going to do with it? So Yitzhak looked for his godliness, and because of that, he loved him. So he loved Esav, but he didn't pay attention to his negative dimensions. He focused on the good that was deep inside him. Now, obviously, in raising Esav, Yitzhak worked on bringing out his good qualities, his depth. And that's the question. Was he able to do that? Was he able to bring that depth out of Esav? Now, the Rambam explains that there are two general kinds of spiritual service. The individual who wants to do only good in the beginning, like a tzaddik, and the one who desires to do evil but conquers his evil inclination, a Benoni. Now, since the patriarchs were on such a high spiritual level that they only wanted to fulfill God's will, the patriarchs themselves never experienced such temptations. But even a person who conquers his evil inclination is tempted sometimes by evil, even if he doesn't give in to it. He feels the temptation, but chooses, even though it may be a struggle, to do good. And a person who does something that's not good can do tshuva. So even though the person that actually has given into evil, his innermost desire to remain attached to God is so strong that he conquers his evil, regrets his past, and returns to his service. So this is tshuva. Now, we get this inspiration from the patriarchs. And of course, the backstory in this Parsha is who is going to be the next of the patriarchs. Is it going to be Yaakov, or is it going to be Esav? And that's something that his parents have to see in order to give a blessing that's going to bring the right one forward to become the third of the three patriarchs. So that's what's going on in this Parsha. So these two ways of service, to be wholly righteous and overcoming evil, were also mirrored in their children. Now, this is something we all have to work on. To desire to be wholly righteous, because we have a godly soul that always wants to be righteous. And we also have an animal soul. And that animal soul is the part of us that keeps things moving. We have to eat something to live. We have to sleep. We have to whatever we have to do. And so the animal soul needs to work for us like a car to get us going to where we want to go and need to go. And then we have to overcome the evil so that the godly soul is on top of the animal soul. We'll talk about this a little more. And these two ways of service were mirrored in these two children. Now, Yaakov was completely righteous. And Esav had the task of conquering his natural tendency toward evil. That was what Esav was supposed to do. He had the free will to do the work and make the choices that would resist evil. Esav, see, we don't say Esav was just no good, forget about him. Not like that. Esav had temptations and he followed them a lot. Now, his choice was to say, I'm not doing so great over here. I'm not doing good things. I need to change what I'm doing. I need to change my ways. And that was up to him. And he had the free will to make the choices that would resist evil. So that's the question. Is he going to do that? So one day, Esav came home from the field hungry, and he pleaded with Yaakov. Yaakov was cooking a stew. And he asked Yaakov, give me some of that stew you're cooking. And there was a question. Which one is the older son? Which one should inherit the title? Which is the right one? And Yaakov said, you want this sauce, this stew? I'll give you some. But you have to exchange your birthright as the firstborn. And Esav, yeah, sure. What do I need that for anyway? Because he didn't want that responsibility. Esav didn't want to do the work. He wanted the stew. What he immediately wanted was what he went for. He didn't want to work. He wanted the stew. He wanted the pleasure of the food, rather than to work on connecting to God and making changes in how he lives. You know, he was a kind of like a fast guy, onto the next pleasure. The truth is, he didn't expect to live that long, and he didn't expect to do the work for God. He just said, I'm having a good time. Give me the stew. It doesn't matter. You want to trade? You got to trade. No problem. And that was Esav. So here we are with these two sons. Yaakov is trying to dig into Esav's depth, to bring out a depth that was there. But Rivka understood the differences between her sons. Rivka grew up among pleasure-seeking idolaters who were dishonest among their other bad character traits. She grew up with her father Besul and a brother Lavan, who we will see more of in the next parsha, who were cheats and irresponsible liars. She, as a child, grew up with these people who were not good people. And she had to work on herself always to look for truth, to choose to do the good, to take care of herself, not to get sucked into their bad behavior, but to protect her goodness. So she knew what it meant to do the work and stay connected to God, even in an environment of evil. She was called like a rose among thorns. So she had to be careful where she went and to keep herself focused on looking for and choosing truth. So Rivka had the intuition of a person who grew up with people who couldn't be trusted. She could see who was who and who was choosing what. She had those street smarts that Yitzchak didn't have. Avraham had it. Sarah had it. Yitzchak didn't have that, but Rivka for sure had that. So even though his parents did the best to raise him, Esav's character didn't change, because despite his potential to do tshuva and go to this higher potential, he didn't want to change. It's really interesting. When people think they just find the way they are, they don't grow, because they say, I'm good. What's the problem? People have to see their qualities that are not good qualities and say, I need to work on this. And we need to talk a little bit more about what that means. Now, as we see, Yaakov wanted the spiritual world, and Esav wanted the material world. And what Yitzchak wanted was he wanted his sons to work together. This is an idealistic hope. Sometimes people have a business and they want their sons to be in the business. And sometimes that works great. The sons get along, they work together, and they make the business even better than it was before. Sometimes they don't have the character to work with each other. And one wants more of something and the other wants something else. And they're unable to be in the same business. And Yitzhak was very idealistic. He hoped that Esav would support Yaakov's desire to make a godly world, a world where the soul takes charge of the body and they work together. That was Yitzhak's hope. But to Rivka, it was completely clear that Esav would try to grab the power and bring evil into the world. So Yitzhak and Rivka were on very different wavelengths about all this. Yitzhak saw Esav's great energy and passion. He had this great energy and passion. And he hoped that giving Esav blessings would help him to bring good energy into the world. And Rivka knew that even before he was born, Esav's intensity was driven to idolatry, not to God. She knew that from his womb. All of us have to work on having a growth mentality. That's something we all have to work on. We have to know that we could work on changing ourselves. Nobody is perfect, and everybody has things that they need to work on. And the hard part of that is that something you have to work on isn't automatic. You have to begin again and again to make the changes that we need to make in order to grow and become who we could become. Now, ultimately, the descendants of Esav, the brother who is deeply involved in the material dimensions of worldly existence, will manifest their spiritual potential. Esav will do tshuva. But Esav won't do it on his own, because Esav's refinement will come because of the difficult labor of Yaakov's descendants, that's us, who dedicate themselves to teaching spiritual truth, and therefore it is Jacob who deserved the blessings from Isaac. And actually the blessings were given to Jacob. In other words, the work that we do in the world changes the world. The work that we do on ourselves and the work that we do to bring godliness into the world changes the world. And that is our job. Now, the true reason for this is that the work of revealing the good in Esav could not be accomplished in a short amount of time, as Yitzhak had hoped would happen. See, sometimes when we're idealistic and we see the potential in somebody, we feel like, I saw that, I got that, good, now I get it, I see who he really is. That is who he really is. But there's work in bringing that out, and that work takes time. So sometimes we realize what we need to do, and we do it. Sometimes we don't do it. We also need to realize that taking action is sometimes more than a 1-minute event. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's something we can change in a moment. And sometimes we need to make a plan and take the steps to make the project go forward. And that's something that Rivka understood, but Yitzhak did not see that with his son. And that's the purpose of our efforts throughout the spiritual history of the world, including this final exile, which is referred to as the exile of Edom, which is another name for Esav. So Esav became the leader of Rome, and Jacob of Jerusalem. And we're still striving to reveal this spiritual energy in the worldly experience, which is associated with Esav. We're still working on changing the world in such a way that Esav will do tshuva. Quite a long project. It's taken a couple of thousand years. We're almost there. So Rivka understood that Esav was not going to be able to carry out his mission. She appreciated that although Yaakov was an artless man, a tamim, very wholehearted, dwelling in tents means in the tents of Torah, the objective of refining the world and preparing it for his ultimate messianic purpose was going to be the work of Jacob. And when the godly soul is on top, training the animal soul to desire what the godly soul wants, then the world is the way it's supposed to be. The godly soul has to train the animal soul to serve it. In other words, we said that we have to eat in order to be healthy. We have to train the animal soul to eat kosher food, to eat healthy food, to eat the right amount, whatever it is that's needed. And the godly soul is saying, don't get sidetracked by the food, by the stuff. Don't get sidetracked. You have to be like, we have to work together. When they're able to work together with the soul on top, then that is what is meant to be. We don't want to get rid of the animal soul. We need it. But we need it to be in the right way. So to achieve that goal, to be able to work with the animal soul also, Jacob would need blessings. Now, to get those blessings and to accomplish this goal, he would have to leave his own natural tendencies and both literally and figuratively put on the garments of Esav. In other words, that he would have to be part of the world, even though that's not where he's from and that's not who he is, but his service is in the world. So he would have to use the world and use the things of the world. You have to be able to say a blessing on the food and eat kosher food in order to keep yourself going as a soul inside a body. So, but even though he would put on the garments of Esav, internally and his way of conduct, he would always remain Jacob, a man of soul. So his work would entail being in the world, but not of it. He would live in the world with the intention of serving God in whatever he did. So you see, this is what Rivka saw, that Yaakov, even in the world, would have an intention to serve God. And Esav would not have that intention to serve God. Esav's intention was to grab the stuff and go for it. And sometimes that meant things that are really not okay. And Rivka felt like she had to handle the situation because she felt that Yitzchak didn't see Esav. Now it so happens that at this point he becomes blind, and it's said that Esav married girls who were Canaanites, who worshipped idols, and that the smoke, when they were in their house, the smoke of the idols blinded him. And so Rivka felt he doesn't see who Esav is. Look who he married, idol worship girls. This can't go on. It's not what we're continuing. So Rivka told Yaakov to put on the garments of Esav and go into his father's tent at the right moment of opportunity when Yitzchak was expecting Esav. Now, Rivka knew she would have to trust her clarity and go forward to make sure that Yitzchak gave the blessings to Yaakov. That was very difficult for Rivka, but this is the same Rivka that said that she couldn't ask her husband about the pregnancy. She had to ask God. And she went to Shem. Now she felt like she couldn't discuss it with Yitzchak because Yitzchak was going to say, you don't see what I see. Esav has such depth, which he did have such depth. And she knew that she had to handle this herself. And she told Esav, Yitzchak had told Esav to cook a special meal from his hunting and bring it to him in his tent, and then he would bless him. And Rivka took the responsibility to tell Yaakov to put on Esav's clothing and bring the food that she would make for her husband. Yaakov had great hesitation about this because it didn't seem that he should, why should he have to fight for the blessing? But he did what his mother said, and he went into the tent and received Isaac's blessings. Now, actually, Yitzchak never considered giving Esav the blessing of Abraham, the blessing of continuing the Jewish ancestry. There were two distinct blessings. One was, so Yitzchak always intended to give Yaakov the spiritual legacy of Abraham, to continue the line of Abraham to receive the Holy Land. So he always saw that the third of the three patriarchs had to be Yaakov. This he saw and planned to give him that blessing as God had given Abraham and Abraham had given to Yitzchak, and he was going to give it now to Yaakov. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the second blessing. Esav was to be granted the blessings of the material world. Yitzchak wanted a partnership between the two. Scholarly, unworldly Yaakov should devote himself to spiritual purposes. And he thought Esav should apply his cunning and worldliness to the constructive development of the material world, in support of and in harmony with Yaakov's holy endeavors. But Yitzchak saw this partnership is not going to happen. She also believed that Yaakov could become a person who could handle the world and do in the world what he needed to do. Rivka realized both worlds had to be given to Yaakov. The material world cannot be given to materialists because all they believe in is stuff and nothing else. And then what are they going to do with the world? Only a person steeped in the divine wisdom can know how to make proper use of God's world. See, that's it. We have to know that it's God's world. Only a person who has a spiritual outlook and value system will be able to master the physical reality rather than be mastered by it. So we need to have that spiritual outlook to see what we have to do in the world. Not that the world controls us, but that the godly perspective gives us the ability to work with the world in a godly way. So like Sarah, Rivka had greater prophecy than her husband. She knew that she needed to protect Yaakov from his brother, and she went forward with her plan. Now, Yaakov and Esav are not just figures from the past, but they're elements existing within the personalities of each one of us. So we each have a Yaakov inside us and an Esav inside us. And by living as Yaakovs in an environment of Esavs, in other words, making sure that the godly soul is on top, then we prepare the world for the coming of Mashiach, when the people's and the world's spiritual core will permeate its material surface. So this is the work that each of us has to do. We have to be connected to God like Yaakov, completely dedicated. And like the potential that Yitzchak saw in Esav, we have to believe that we can work with ourselves, that we can work on having a growth mentality, so that when it comes to doing what we're in the world to do, that we can make the changes in ourselves that we need to make. And as we saw, we have the potential, as Yitzchak did see that. But like Rivka saw, it takes time. So we have to have patience with our own qualities that need to grow, and focus, have patience on our qualities that need to grow. And we have to work on this. So the final consummation of these efforts will come in the era of redemption, when it says that the deliverers will go up to Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esav, and the sovereignty will be God's. Esav did a lot of not good things, through the years that they were in the Roman exile. And these are the descendants of Esau who've done a lot of wrong things. But the time comes that at any time soon, God willing, that the remaining descendants of Esau will do tshuva. And the powerful spiritual energies which Esau possesses will surface and be given appropriate expression. So we learned in the previous Parsha that Yishmael will do tshuva and Esau will do tshuva. Are we seeing that? Well, we see that some people are, and some people are not yet. But we have to see that we need to keep doing our part to be strong in doing what we need to do to make this a godly world. And we have to trust that very soon that what God wants from us will be accomplished and that we're going to live in a world of godliness. So may we do what we're here to do, and may it be greatly successful. Be blessed.